It is a wonderful time to be alive, and it's important that we remind ourselves of that right now, where sometimes it's hard to see. We had no idea we would be quarantined for so long. We had no idea the world would erupt with a fever for social justice, and yet there is so much good to celebrate. And there is a moment where we are asking questions about what is it that people of faith are called to do at this time. And so my talk today is on the history of spiritual allyship, because it's time that we look back so we can go forward. I need to tell you that during this time period, I've had sometimes what they call a dark night of the soul, a crisis of faith, time in the wilderness, because I haven't been really sure that we, the people of faith, we, the new thought folks, that we are really ready for the challenge that is in front of us. I've questioned whether religion has become the opiate of the masses, as has been said before, because I feel sometimes like we're awake but not fully awake. You know that when you're lying in bed and you know you're awake, but you just haven't really decided if you're going to get up and do something or if you're going to go back to sleep. That is this moment. It's the moment where we have to decide if we're going to actually get up and get started with what needs to be done, or if we're going to fall back to sleep. And so this is my invitation to us, is to reflect on the strength and the courage and the dedication of those who have come before us, to hold out as the high standard those who have given so much of themselves in the cause of social justice. And so I just want us to remember. And I want to start with my own remembering, my own gratitude for the white allies that have shown up in my life. Some of you know that I'm from Detroit, Michigan. If you've ever heard me talk, you probably know that already. I like to call Detroit the Wakanda of the United States. But when I went away to boarding school at 14 and came to college in California, I began to encounter these stereotypes about Black people, and I was shocked at the ignorance. And I don't mean it in a pejorative way. I just mean as in do not know the diversity of who Black people are. People who thought our only music was hip hop when we invented jazz and rock and roll. And my grandparents were senior members of the Black Square Dancers Club. And even Black people haven't heard of that. But I'm just trying to tell you that if your sample size is limited, then you might not know the diversity of Black people. You might trade in those stereotypes. But even as I encountered that internalized racism, I also encountered those champions, those people who made a way for me, not just in name or in sympathy, not just even in empathy, but in sharing their power and their platforms, in empowering me. That was Sue Carlson when I was away at boarding school, who just gave me a platform and taught me that my voice and my art mattered. There was Jim Aho in Focus Hope in Detroit, Michigan, who couldn't believe that a little Black girl didn't know about jazz, and was like, oh no, honey, you're not gonna get away from here without knowing about this Black music. And I just was grateful. And there's been so many people along the way. There was Susanna Wood and Ann Indris, who dedicated themselves to children and art in Oakland without need for approval or praise, but just showing up every day in the gap for our children. When I got to Stanford, I met Jennifer Rowland, who was advocating so strongly for low-income and first-generation students who came from where she came. She didn't come to this world with a silver spoon in her mouth, but she never, ever conflated her oppression as a low-income person with her whiteness. She understood that that is not apples to apples. If you're comparing whiteness to low-income experiences, that's not apples to apples. We have all kind of low-income people, but whiteness is still an advantage among them. And she understood that, showed up as a radical ally, and I'm grateful for her and all the people, the Hazel Marcuses, the Shelley Carrells, the Sarah Stein Greenbergs, all the people who said, I'm with you in this. I will support you. I will sponsor you, mentor you, do whatever it takes to make sure I'm sharing this power and prestige of this university. When I got to Silicon Valley and corporate America, people say, oh, I don't even know how you're going to talk to those folks. That's what we all say about everybody. But I found champions there too. I found Thomas Sexton at LinkedIn, who actually used to be right here at East Bay Church, and we didn't even know that when we met each other. I found Nick Mehta, who is a CEO of a major tech company, and wrote me the other day, said, I love your sermon. I said, oh my goodness, I had no idea my folks in corporate America were watching, but I'm grateful for Nick, and I'm grateful for Maggie McBennett and so many other people who do the work, not for me, but with us. And then I went to ministerial school, and I made real, true friends and spiritual allies. There's Sarah Nichols, who's in Sacramento, and Melissa and Z, who you probably already know because of their fantastic ministry. And then there is my spiritual best friend forever, my SBFF, as we like to call her, Karen Fry, who is one of the most consistent and staunch and vocal and unapologetic allies that I know. And I needed to give you that list because sometimes we think we're alone in this. And sometimes because I have a pulpit and a microphone, you want to shine all the spotlight on me. But I want to tell you that people made a way. People opened doors. People gave up power, gave up seats, gave up platforms for me to be where I am today. And that's important to my story. You know, I'm going to bring the heat and the fire. But I also want to bring the praise and the recognition. Because it's important that we as a spiritual community not commit the spiritual bypass of thinking that because we have high principles of powerful thinking, because we have high principles of seeing beyond conditions, because we have high principles that we are somehow exempt from taking action, that we are somehow exempt from naming the problem, that we are somehow exempt for taking accountability and responsibility for our part. Dr. King said that sometimes it seems like white folks are more concerned with tranquility and the status quo than justice and humanity. He talked about people who want what he called a negative peace, which is the absence of tension. We just want everything to be calm and positive vibes only, and we want everybody to be nice to each other. He said that's a negative peace because a positive peace is the presence of justice. It means we cannot rest on our mountaintop. We cannot rest on our laurels. We cannot rest in our peaceful consciousness, because I can tell your consciousness by the actions that you're taking. I know whether your thinking is transformative, whether you really believe in oneness by the activity that you do. They say we shall know them by their fruit. So if you are evolved in consciousness, then you are involved in revolution, because you have to be. Because you see the consciousness in this nation. You see the need. You see that the issue of our day that needs healing is racism. It's so many things that need healing, but don't ignore this one. It's not too big. And how do we know it's not too big? We look back, lest we forget. I want to talk to you about some principles of allyship. I talk about all the time being brave and being humble and being dedicated. This is what we call an inclusive mindset. And so I want to give you some examples, some principles, some guidelines, because we can't just talk about what not to do. We have to talk about what to do, and we have to remember that this is not the roughest side of the mountain. This is a hard time. But it's a powerful opportunity, and we have a legacy of accomplishing much more through much worse systems, much worse circumstances. We have abolished slavery and integrated society, and we've got to draw upon those people who gave. When I was researching for today, I wanted to tell the stories of some powerful white allies in history, and I came across the story of one who exhibits that first principle of being brave. Her name was Juliette Morgan, and she came from a wealthy, aristocratic family in Alabama. And just to show you how God works in such mysterious ways, it just so happened that Juliette also had anxiety. She would get nervous in situations, and as such, she didn't like cars. She wouldn't drive one. She didn't want to ride in one. So instead, she rode the bus in Montgomery, Alabama. And I bet you know what happened then. She got to see how Black people were mistreated on the bus. She got to see firsthand how sometimes a Black person would get in the front of the bus to pay their fare because that's where you had to pay. And then they get off so they could walk to the back because that's where they had to enter. And the bus driver would drive off before they could get back on, even after they paid their fare. And she saw this and she did what I'm asking you to do. She pulled the emergency cord. She said, "Oh no, not on my watch." She ran up to the front of the bus and said, "Stop." And every time she saw one of those injustices, she pulled the emergency cord. This is what real spiritual allies do. They stop the bus. And she was not liked for this. She was attacked. The teenage boys made fun of her. They tried to get her fired from her job at the library. Even her own mother stopped talking to her and said she was embarrassing the family. This is what I'm trying to tell you. It's not going to be easy. It's never been easy for us. Why did you think it was going to be easy for you? We want to be one. This is what one looks like. It means walking together through the hard parts. And it got hard for Juliette. And she called out the fact that she felt so alone. She saw another white man write an article in a newspaper, and she wrote to him. She said, "I'm so grateful that I found somebody else who would speak up, because I believe that it is our biggest problem is overcoming the fear of decent white people." See, she held on to the idea. She knew there were people in her community that she referred to as decent white people, but she knew they were afraid to speak up. But she spoke up anyway, even when she was the only one, and she paid the cost. She paid the cost so that she was so despondent and so depressed about feeling alone and attacked that she took her own life. What could have been different for Juliette if she had a community of support, if she wasn't the one and only walking the hard road, if somebody else started pulling the emergency cord with her? But I want to tell you that Juliette's life was not in vain. In her last article that she wrote to the newspaper, she said, "I have so much respect for these folks in this boycott. They remind me of the movement of Gandhi." And Dr. King later wrote that it was because of her article that she published in the paper that when they were boycotting, the whole community knew the name of Mahatma Gandhi, right? Little things mean a lot. And I want to tell you that this librarian who was harassed and threatened to the degree that she took her own life, the public library in Montgomery is named after her. See, if we're going to take down these monuments, we need to put up some new ones. We need to know the name of Juliette Morgan and more like her. Because what we are asking for is not new. It was done by the abolitionists. It was done throughout history by the people who spoke out against slavery since its very inception, like Emerson. There were people who were always calling it out, and although they were few and far between, they were real, and we ought to know their names. And then the next principle after being brave is being humble. Being humble. It means recognizing that we don't know everything and that we're going to make mistakes and we have to keep going anyway. It's recognizing that we've had privilege, yes, the P word, we've had the privilege to not be thinking about whiteness, to not be thinking about how it impacts people of color. We've had the privilege to do something that Robin DiAngelo calls set the rules of engagement with white fragility. I want you to read this book. I've told all my white friends, please, it just helps me with the shorthand so I don't have to explain things to you. I believe the book White Fragility should be subtitled, Black People, You Are Not Crazy. And so Robin DiAngelo, who wrote this book, on page 123, she lays out some of the ways that white fragility has set up rules of engagement that allow for the person of color who is giving feedback to be pressed back into silence. I want to read you a few of the things that she says are the white fragility rules of engagement. Number one, do not give me feedback on my racism under any circumstances. And if you violate the cardinal rule, here are the other rules you must follow. Number two, proper tone is crucial. It must be given calmly, and there can be no emotion in you giving me feedback about my racism. Number three, you must trust that I am in no way racist before you can give me feedback on my racism, right? We got to have trust. Before you can tell me that I have racism, you got to believe that I'm not racist. Come on with that illogical principle. You have to give the feedback privately and immediately, because if you cannot protect me from embarrassment, then your feedback is invalid and you are the transgressor. This is how we see it get flipped around. Well, you have hurt me. You have offended me. Here's number 8. I must feel completely safe during any discussion of race. Because if you make me uncomfortable, well, then we will need to turn our attention to how you oppress me. I know some of y'all know exactly what I'm talking about. You speak out and then you are punished back into silence. Oh, number 10. I just want y'all to know that my book is full of highlights and stars. I had to come up with a new coding system. I cried 4 times reading this book. Number 10, you must acknowledge my intentions, always good, and agree that my good intentions cancel out the impact of my behavior. Let me just tell you right now that impact trumps intent. I get you didn't mean it, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about how I felt about it, how it impacted me. So we're not getting ready to move and change the whole conversation to your intention. Stay with me and the impact that I had. And then last but not least, this is number 11. To suggest my behavior had a racist impact is to have misunderstood me. You will need to allow me to explain myself until you can acknowledge that it was your misunderstanding. Now, some of this I know sounds familiar, and I'm not trying to call you out. I'm trying to call you in. I'm saying that we can do better. I'm not asking you to get involved in guilt and shame for whatever you did before. I'm asking you to get up out of bed and get busy. Do you understand what I'm saying? She gave some advice about how to handle it. And while she had 11 items for the problem, she has 2 for the solution. She says, how, where, and when you give me feedback is irrelevant. Understanding that it is hard to give, I will take it any way I can get it. And if I cannot handle it, it's on me to build what she calls my racial stamina. I love that term. Y'all gonna need to get your racial stamina together. And then number 2 is quite simple. Say thank you. Feedback is hard to give. It is so hard as a marginalized person, whether you are a person of color, a person with a disability, a person who is gender nonconforming. It's so hard to speak up from that marginalized position and say, ow, that hurt me. No, that's not okay. It's hard enough to do it without having somebody then tell you they can't hear it. You didn't say it right. That's not the way. I don't like it. You misunderstood me. Listen. Feedback is a gift. Receive it. And then I want to move on to what I think is the most misunderstood but most important aspect of spiritual allyship. It is be dedicated. This is not a sprint. It is a marathon. It is going to take everything that you have to eradicate centuries of racism. It's going to take everything that you have. We have given everything that we had, and it still hasn't been enough. So we're going to need each other. We're going to need each other, and we've done it before, so we can do it again, but it cannot be one without the other. It never has been. And so there is a website called whiteaccomplices.org that I checked out because there's been some fights about this word allyship, and some people are saying we don't need allies, we need accomplices, we need co-conspirators. I personally don't care what you call it. I just care that you do something important and significant. But on the website, they had an interesting continuum that I thought I would share with you. It talks about the difference between an actor, an ally, and an accomplice. And it gives us some frame to think about how spiritual folk are showing up and what it means. See, an actor is a person who poses as anti-racist. They do some things, but they're not really trying to challenge the status quo. You know, they change their social media posts and they say, oh, that's so horrible. And they, you know, just acknowledge oh, that's bad. And I see so many in our spiritual community thinking that that's enough. Just to say, oh, that's horrible. Or I stand with you, to wear a button or a pin, or you know what it is, right? To want to be recognized for being down or woke or whatever we call it today. But it's not really a challenge to the way things work. Whereas they talk about an ally as a disruptor. It's somebody who looks in the moment like Juliet and pulls the cord and says, wait. We're not getting ready to treat people like this. It's a person who puts themselves on the line and their comfort on the line to be able to interrupt the system of oppression. And we've had so many people who were allies in small but important ways. I'm told that Ella Fitzgerald thanked Marilyn Monroe because she made sure that Ella could play in clubs. Marilyn said, I will come and sit in the front row every night and bring you an audience as long as you let Ella play. And she did. There was Frank Sinatra who did things to make sure Nevada could be integrated. There were lots of people. There was a guy that I read about, Jack Olson, who wrote a 5-part series in the 60s called The Black Athlete, A Shameful Story. There have always been people who did the little things to show up and call out and disrupt and interrupt discrimination when they saw it. But an accomplice is something different. And here's what Malcolm X had to say about it. Where the really sincere white people have got to do in terms of proving themselves is not among the black victims, but out on the battle lines of where America's racism really is. And that's in their home communities. America's racism is among their own fellow whites. See, this is the much harder work. It's easy to be an ally to say, I'm so sorry about what's happening to you. Or to be an actor, to be an ally and say, I'm going to, stand up and interrupt when someone mistreats you. That's a good thing. But what Malcolm is talking about, see, is dismantling the systems of oppression. It's actually rolling up one's sleeves and making a commitment that's bigger than a small thing, that is saying, I am not going to take a break when this moment is done. This is my life. This is my commitment. It's who I am. It's how you can count on me to always show up. And accomplices have relationships with organizations and communities where they collaborate and cooperate and they take direction. And they are accountable when, not if, when they make mistakes. Because when Robin DiAngelo talks about white fragility, what she's saying is some of us get to be so spiritual that we can't take feedback because we have this narcissism, come on, that suddenly because I'm deeply spiritual, I'm better than somebody else. But that means we haven't understood the principle of oneness at all. When Ernest Holmes talks about treatment, he says you cannot go in with the idea that you are saving somebody who is not able or not capable. That's not how it works. It works when you are one with somebody so that everything that is true for you is also true for them, and you are just recognizing that fact. That's what treatment is. That's what a practitioner does, is know the truth that we are one. Not that I am spiritual and evolved, so I'm going to teach you something. That's not how that works. And so we want to think about whatever word you use. We want to think about dismantling systems. We want to think about lifetime commitment. We want to say that just like we can't take off this skin, you can't take off your commitment to being an ally. Not one moment, not 1 minute, not one day. This doesn't mean don't take care of yourself, because taking care of yourself is what you have to do for a marathon. But it means not expecting to get some kind of reward or badge because you did what you were supposed to do, what is the right thing, the spiritual thing, the human thing, the enlightened thing, which is to speak out, act, do, dismantle injustice. So I'm going to argue that we need to cultivate a new white identity. Julia Butterfly Hill came to Oakland years ago, and she was talking about, she was the one who climbed up the tree and saved the tree and protested, and she stayed in the tree. And I said, I believe in environmental justice, but I need to tell you that there is a feeling in our community that we're willing to risk everything to save the trees, but not to save the people. And she said, I hear you. And I want to give you a platform. And so many years ago, right here in Oakland, I stood up and I said, white people, you got to come up with a new idea of your identity. We're going to have to do something different. In fact, I went to London one time, and they have this area called Speaker's Corner. And you ever heard the expression, you're up on your soapbox? It comes from Speaker's Corner, where people used to come and stand on soapboxes. Every Sunday, a whole bunch of people come out, and they just give speeches. So when I heard about that, I for sure went. And I went out there, and a white guy out there gave me his ladder. And he said, I like what you're talking about. Come on, stand on the ladder. So I stood on the ladder, and I started talking about race and healing and spirituality. And, a lot of people in Europe like to think that racism is a white problem in the United States, a problem for people of color over here. And they always say that to people in Britain. They say, oh, this is a U.S. thing. And it was black folks from Britain standing around. I said, what y'all think? Is this a U.S. thing? And they were like, no, no. Right? Because anti-blackness is a thing around the world. So I'm standing there and I'm talking, I'm engaging, and it's all going good. And the guy who gave me the ladder is laughing. And then one of his friends challenged me. And I challenged him right back. And I could feel the guy who gave me the ladder getting uncomfortable. And we got into it, but I was still respectful. And at one point, the guy said, you got to come down now. And I said, well, I'm just, talking. Everybody's out here still speaking. He said, you got to come down now. It's my ladder. You see, this is the fear that we have in trusting, because in the end, it always comes down to power and property. And somebody will give you a platform until you say something that makes them or theirs uncomfortable. And that's the thing we cannot do. We cannot pull the ladder out from under folks. We cannot say, I'm with you as long as you say things that make me comfortable, because it's time for us to get uncomfortable. It's time for you to listen to somebody that sounds like they're attacking you, and just be humble and take that feedback as a gift, because anger sparks the fire. It sparks the wake up. It's the alarm clock that got you out of bed. It's okay. It's not just okay. It's often necessary. It is the catalyst for change, but we can't just stay there. We've got to do something with it. And I just want us to remember that kind of fire, that kind of passion ignited movements, and there were white allies every step of the way. We've got to remember the Juliette Morgans and the Pastor James Reeves and the Viola Liuzos and the Freedom Riders and the people who founded the NAACP, and Jonathan Daniels, who stood between a black boy and a bullet and gave his life. He was in ministerial school at the time. We need to understand there's a higher standard. There's a higher standard for sacrifice than being uncomfortable. I'm not telling you you have to take a bullet. I'm telling you that there is a history of white allyship that is strong. But we got to be careful, because sometimes when we get into this moment of celebrating white folks, they get it twisted. And then we move into what we call the white savior mode. So we got to be careful about that, because I do believe we need to acknowledge and appreciate our allies, but you don't want to get so woke, right, that you're now wearing a badge. You're now calling yourself an ally. Let the people say what relationship you have to them. And I'll give you an example. I have always said, black people didn't start the Underground Railroad. And that's true. The Quakers out of Pennsylvania and people like Levi and Catherine Coffin are responsible for creating a system where 100,000 black people were freed. But I want to tell you, they did not do it by themselves. And in fact, I learned that they didn't even lead most of it. There were people like William Still in Philadelphia who were responsible for catalyzing free black folk, who often were the people who led the Underground Railroad. It was black folk who actually were liberating themselves from slavery in the South. The Underground Railroad was mostly in the North. So as a slave and enslaved African, you had to get yourself to the North by yourself. And then there were folks on the Underground Railroad. I didn't know any of this. So we have to complicate the narrative. And then I want to caution us also around this cancel culture, because I'm noticing that every time people step up to action or allyship or even accomplice, there is this constant critique that is not enough. I love white fragility, but it's already people saying, well, she didn't say enough and she didn't do enough and she's white and she shouldn't be making money off this moment. I'm like, if we don't have a yes, a no is not going to get us there. We have to be careful not to become the thing we are trying to unseat. You cannot destroy the master's house with the master's tools. I want to tell you how I came to realize that. Some of you have heard me tell the story of organizing around the murder of Oscar Grant here in Oakland. And there was a moment during the organizing where a group of fellow organizers went to the board and they threw red paint on a woman named Dorothy Duggars. And they said, the blood is on your hands. And I realized in that moment that I had spent my life being unapologetically black, but I also wanted to be unapologetically spiritual, because I believe, as Dr. King believed, that darkness cannot drive out darkness, that only light can do that hate cannot drive out hate, that only love can do that. And so this is that moment where we have to talk about a pathway to redemption. We have to talk about a pathway to redemption. We have to talk about the ways in which we are going to activate spiritual activism. This is the important moment for us, is to move forward together as one people who really believe in the oneness, who really believe in the transformative power of seeing God in everyone. This is our moment. We are the ones that everyone has been waiting for. We have been preparing for this. We have been believing in this. We have been practicing. East Bay is one of the most multiracial communities that I've ever been in. They say church is the most segregated day of the week, but not here. So this is that time. And I want to read to you two things. One is from an ancient Taoist text. And it says, if you want to awaken all of humanity, then awaken all of yourself. If you want to eliminate the suffering in the world, then eliminate all that is dark and negative in yourself. Truly, the greatest gift that you have is to give that of your own self-transformation. And just in case y'all think I'll be coming without that religious science text, let me just tell you what Ernest Holmes said about it. Here on How to Use the Science of Mind, on page 146, he said, there is no conceit, no bigotry in this practice. There is no holier than thou attitude. It must be a thing of sincerity and simplicity. The practitioner who mistakenly believes that his patient is not ready to receive the great truths he has to offer upon closer examination of his own consciousness will discover that he himself is not yet ready to deliver those truths.